Let's talk about why you should pay more attention to your sleep. It's not because very long sleep can give you superhuman performance, though it can, and here's a video about it. And it's not because people who sleep poorly are at a nearly 70 to 180% increased risk of virtually every major chronic condition you can think of, from heart disease to diabetes to frailty. And it's not even because you probably have no idea how poorly you actually sleep, though that's probably true too. And here's a video about that. No, the main reason you should pay more attention to your sleep is this. It's because poor sleep results in permanent brain damage, and it seems to happen pretty quickly. There was an interesting study of this involving flight attendants. Researchers were curious how jet lag affected them. Like anybody else, a flight attendant who crosses many time zones and becomes jet lagged is going to have difficulty sleeping. Their internal clock tells them that it's time to be awake when it's actually time to be asleep. And so they don't sleep very much, or at least they sleep poorly. And it's easy to identify which flight attendants this affects most. It's the international flight attendants who are flying across these many time zones and sleep horribly. And so we have these two easily comparable groups. We have the international flight attendants who sleep horribly, and then we have the other flight attendants who presumably sleep more normally. And this is what happened to the international flight attendants' brains. And keep in mind that flight attendants are fairly young on average. These international flight attendants' brains were becoming demented at a young age. They were getting an old person's brain. That is, that their cognitive performance was going down, their reflexes were slowing, and the portion of the brain associated with dementia was shrinking, just like people who actually have real dementia. Now, you might be saying, this doesn't mean that they have what you're saying. This could have been temporary. These people were sleep deprived and probably groggy. It doesn't mean they have long-term irreversible brain damage like with dementia. Another very smart study looked at whether poor sleep actually does speed us towards real dementia. It was smart because it only looked at people who were 75 and older and who did not have dementia yet. These were people who are statistically on the cusp of developing dementia. And by looking at people who are just about at that cusp, researchers were able to quickly identify what pushed them over that cusp. They suspected that it was sleep, and so they followed these people's sleep patterns and their brains for the next 3 years. And in just that amount of time, they were able to see if you didn't sleep well during that study period, you were at a 75% increased risk of developing depression and a 100% increased risk of developing Alzheimer's. Those are horrifying statistics when you're a person who already might be sleeping poorly. And it's even scarier when you consider that just one night of poor sleep can speed us towards that result. Researchers were able to determine this by looking at beta amyloid. As you probably know, most people think of beta amyloid as being the cause of dementia. And people debate whether that's actually the case, but regardless, beta amyloid plaquing goes hand in hand with this kind of brain degeneration. It's a waste product that builds up in our brains when we're awake, and when we sleep, it's cleared out. But if we don't sleep, or if we don't sleep well, then it isn't cleared. We now know that just one night of sleep deprivation results in significant, measurable amounts of beta amyloid deposition in our brains. And this was of a study of a broad range of adults, all the way down to people who are 22 years old. We all, regardless of our ages, need to be concerned about how poor sleep is affecting our brains. It can cause that kind of damage in just one night. And it's not just that kind of damage that poor sleep causes. It's not just the brain damage that we might call dementia. It's virtually all kinds of brain problems. If you were to look at the #1 scientific journal, Nature, it published a review indicating that poor sleep is associated with virtually every kind of chronic mental health problem and virtually every kind of neurodegenerative condition. If you have insomnia, the #1 sleep problem, you're at a hugely increased risk of also developing things like depression. And to add insult to injury, if you sleep poorly, you're more likely to look older faster and look uglier. And when I explained all this to my son, he said in a kind of scared voice, "Dad, I don't sleep all that well. What can I do?" In the next video, we'll look at how you can improve your sleep, how you can sleep better and longer. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you then.